Hi, good afternoon. My name is Prem Gill, and I'm the CEO of CreativeBC, and I'm your co-host with James Hursthouse today. James is the acting executive director and the chair of DigiBC, so he's his own boss. We're really happy to be here today and excited about the program this afternoon. Over to you, James.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Hope you really enjoyed the lunch presented by Rio Tinto. I certainly did. So I got a lot of energy for this afternoon. We're going to be with us here for 3 or 4 hours, really to take a look at BC's creative sector and particularly that intersection between creative and technology. We have a really strong lineup this afternoon. Lots of different speakers representing all different facets of the creative technology industry, from VR, MR, AR, games, animation, and a lot of other sectors. And we're going to hear from some BC companies that are really making an impact here and around the world. And also, you know, we'll get a sense of where innovation is really transforming this creative technology industry, just as it is with a lot of the other industries that are represented here at the summit. So you can see what's going to be on the schedule if you log into the mobile app. I don't know how many of you have done that, but there's a lot of speaker bios and things on the mobile app. And also, you're able to give feedback for the sessions live through the app as well, which is really good because it gives us the opportunity to understand that feedback and make sure that that we're delivering the content that's relevant. Also, I think some of the presenters might ask you to provide feedback through the clicker there, which will obviously make the sessions more interactive.
And everybody here obviously knows that the creative sector, as James had mentioned, is strong and growing, and we are recognized as a global leader in the creative content development and in the production. And a lot of people you're going to hear from today are in the thick of all of this. So we're going to explore how technology is transforming workflow processes and boosting both efficiency and productivity across the digital media sector. So we're living in exciting and rapidly changing times, and it really is going to be a deep dive into the creative sector here. Our first presentation is going to be from Prashant Matta, and Prashant is from OMERS Ventures. And CreativeBC, along with agencies across the province, including across the country, including the Canada Media Fund and Telephone Canada, participated in a VR ecosystem study of Canada that's still in the process of being completed. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Prashant, who is going to give us a sneak peek into what this study is starting to reveal and how we as British Columbians and BC companies can start to think about our position within this. So please join me in welcoming Prashant.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, and it's been a great day today so far. I'll be sharing some of my views on the state of virtual reality. I'll start off by saying that it's been great working in this sector over the last couple of years, and you know, if you have certain questions, feel free to come by and ask me later on. I'll jump off by thanking some of our sponsors. As Prem mentioned earlier, I've been collaborating with the Canadian Film Centre on a VR study across Canada. The study was completed by over 200 companies in Canada, including 50+ companies out of BC. A lot of insights to share. I'll share some sneak peeks today, including some of my views of where the ecosystem is overall. So, virtual reality. You've probably seen this before. VR is seen as potentially the next big computing platform, and why that is, there are many examples, including the way it will change we experience entertainment, interacting with doctors, even doing business in virtual worlds. All these use cases and opportunities do position VR to be disruptive to not only existing industries, but also create opportunities in new sectors. But we are just getting started. We are really in the early stages of development. The way I look at the market today, think of it as is, we are in year 0. We are just seeing launch of first generation VR products, so that are products from Oculus, Samsung, HTC, and so on. If you look at where we stand today in terms of hardware distribution, we have about 17 million units in the market. And if you take out Google Cardboard, we generally have about 7 million. Not bad for a nascent market, I would say. But what's interesting to see and realize is really we're just getting started. So as technology advances, price points drop, consumers start to experience quality VR content, we'll see the adoption curve pick up in the coming years. And what that does overall is creates a new marketplace for content and applications, both on the business side and consumer side, which in the long term really will be worth way more than you would see on the hardware side. Eventually, when we see mainstream adoption, as you can see on the slide, and VR becomes a mainstream computing platform, we'll see a lot of users across the world engaging with applications through this medium. And eventually, if things go as they should, I'll be probably doing this presentation in a haptics chair from home rather than being here in person. In terms of the way I think about the ecosystem, they're really the way I categorize the VR ecosystem in three broad areas. Starting from the bottom are the hardware manufacturers and the accessories. If you move up the stack, you start to see software solutions and enablers. These are the tools that people like yourselves will use to create VR experiences. And on the top, you see the application or the content itself that is delivered to the end user, which is engaging with a VR device. Now, there are a few interesting takeaways here. One, if you're trying to build a company or you have a company in the bottom half of the stack, some things to consider are what parts of that stack are going to get commoditized over time. So if you look at hardware and accessory, it's more likely than not that they'll be controlled by large manufacturers such as Oculus, Samsung, and HTC. Where I see opportunities, if I were to build something and participate in this sector, where I see opportunities is top of the stack, which is where you see emerging content and applications. Now, if you are thinking about creating content in VR, something to think about as you look at opportunities is there are three things. One, you need creative skills, and these are creative skills that are not so much transferred from existing medium. It's something that needs to be trained and looked at from ground up. The second thing to think about is your technology infrastructure. So in VR, content and technology are so heavily integrated, you can't create good content without having those two in the same equation. And finally, longer term is creating IP around content. So I understand a lot of folks here are from the content side of the business, and those are the three things to think about as I look at the ecosystem in Canada. Moving on to how the ecosystem is structured. So this is no surprise. A vast majority of Canadian VR companies are focused on content and application development. So this is part of our study, as I mentioned, that was completed by over 200 companies in the country. What is surprising to me, or at least my takeaway as I looked at the data, was there are a number of companies that are operating across these areas, across the stack. So what they've done is they got into the sector really early on. They started by creating their own hardware systems, such as cameras and capture systems, and that they've made their way up all the way to content creation. Something to think about as you start to build companies and create VR content in BC or elsewhere is some of these capabilities would need to be built in-house, and some of these capabilities you could actually partner and vendor with going forward. What was interesting as well is if you look at the stage of different businesses that are operating in this sector. So overall, like I said earlier, we're in the early stages of development of this sector. But when you look at the folks that completed our survey and you look at results from BC, BC had a higher percentage of companies that currently have products and services in the market. Now that could be either because of the VFX and traditional talent around content creation, or that could be because of the way the startup ecosystem is evolving in British Columbia. So that was super interesting as I was reviewing the data around the survey results and trying to pull out insights as we look at the ecosystem broadly. So in terms of use cases, where does this go? So today, there is no doubt the main anchor use case for VR is entertainment. So that includes gaming and it includes cinematic VR. That it could be a combination of the two. But according to our survey results, what we are seeing is going forward, we'll likely see use cases and applications built across different verticals, specifically if you look at B2B side. And what I mean really is opportunities will be in tourism, as an example, education, and healthcare. So when we start to look beyond entertainment and look longer term where this medium's going, it is more likely that we'll see a huge ecosystem of applications that emerge around B2B verticals. Barriers to success. So that was one of the questions we asked our survey participants as to where they see challenges in the market today. There are top 3 that stand out. Number 1, talent. There is a limited pool of talent related to VR in Canada, and that goes in the US as well. And it's because it's an emerging sector. And similar to how digital video or media was years ago, we'll likely see a surge in folks or talent that actually train themselves to create content or applications around VR going forward. The second challenge that came up is around funding, and that includes both public funding around content itself or private funding from folks such as myself on the venture capital side. And I'll touch on these 3 topics in a bit. Third being market maturity. It remains to be seen how the market's going to evolve. As I said earlier in one of the earlier slides, we are in the early stages of development. It remains to be seen how the ecosystem will evolve over time, how consumers will adopt these devices, because without large hardware device distribution, there would not be as many applications in the marketplace. So you need content and you need hardware to go hand in hand for this ecosystem to evolve over time. So I will start with talking a little bit about talent. So there are 2 charts here that I like to talk about. They're not correlated, but I'll try and infer some takeaways for everyone here. First, on the left, you'll see the increasing number of companies that are focusing on creating virtual reality experiences. Now, that includes companies that are existing media companies that may be leveraging their IP or media properties to create shorter VR experiences. And that also includes brand new startups that are going after this sector. What that really tells us, and these are results from Canadian ecosystem, what that tells us, as you can see from the chart, there has been a complete surge in number of companies that are being formed around this sector, and this trend will continue going forward. On the right side are the VR employees that were captured in the study. So when we polled companies in the country, we asked them how many employees you have that dedicate and spend 100% of their time on VR. And those are the results on the right side. So as the ecosystem evolves over time, both of these charts should really evolve together. If that doesn't happen, there will be opportunities around M&A. And what I'm trying to say is, if you think about VFX and how things evolved there was a shortage of talent at some point, and then larger companies started to acquire talent around VFX. And we could see a similar type of evolution when we talk about the VR ecosystem. As an investor, that's exciting for me, because if I invest in a virtual reality company and they get eventually acquired, that's how I would generate return. But even as an entrepreneur or a business thinking of building products and services in this sector, it should be exciting. And as you think about longer term your business models, think about how you would actually make money in this sector. And investment. I get this question a lot around what is happening around VC investments in AR, VR. So my view is as follows. If you ignore the AR side of things, VR has been one of the fastest growing in terms of capital deployment from a venture capital perspective. So in 2016, we basically hit an all-time high in terms of the dollars going into the sector. What that also created was a little bit of a hype around the ecosystem and where the opportunities are. So today, if I talk to my peers at other VC funds, both in Canada and US, investors are generally optimistic about VR, but they're also very cautious about it. And there are many reasons. One, it remains to be seen how the ecosystem's going to evolve, and we're going to see around how many devices are in the market. But also, there's unclarity around the business models that are going to emerge in virtual reality. So that still needs to be figured out. But that's not to say investment's going to stop. Good investors will take opportunities and invest in companies that have unique use cases or unique IP, good content, if you're going after a content team, and the talent around it is going to be super important, as I mentioned earlier. I will say what I've noticed in the VC side of things, over the last couple of years, a lot of dollars went into, let's say, the bottom half of the stack. So that was hardware, accessories, software, backend solutions that were being developed, such as analytics. What I'm noticing a trend now is a lot more money going on the top half of the stack, which is more on content development, application development. Content is not generally an area where VCs have invested in the past, mainly because it's hard to replicate and scale those businesses. But in VR, it's very unique because both the content creation and technology are so integrated that there could be a case and a thesis around investing in a content platform. But as I said earlier, the key, if you're a content creator, and if you're looking to raise capital from private investors, is going to demonstrate not only your creative talent and workflows, but also how your technology supports from capture all the way to post-production and delivery, because that really helps a company deliver high-quality VR content, which is lacking today. So when will VR be mainstream? Another question I get all the time. Frankly, I'm not sure. I don't think anyone has an answer around this. But based on our survey results, what folks think in Canada and in the Canadian ecosystem, anywhere between 2 and 5 years. It depends on what you mean when you ask what's mainstream. My view is if you get 20% of smartphone users on the platform using virtual reality, then we're getting there because of the large smartphone distribution. I will say that the way the ecosystem may evolve going forward is in 2 parts. One will be a segment dedicated to core users, which are gaming. So you'll likely see companies like Oculus and HTC continue to expand in those areas. And the bigger pie will be on the mobile VR side, which is still evolving because smartphones need to evolve and the technologies and content need to evolve for mobile VR to actually succeed. But all in all, what's interesting is larger audience base may be on the VR side. I will end by sharing 5 key takeaways, and we should have a little bit of time to take questions. Number 1, timing. Like I said, remains to be seen how VR is going to evolve. But if you are a business or you're an entrepreneur looking to build products and services in this sector, think of it giving yourself 18 to 24 months of runway, either through partnerships or by raising capital through public and private funders. Because by then, the ecosystem should evolve, and there should be increasing number of opportunities to build great companies in this sector. Second, desktop versus mobile. As I mentioned, there will be opportunities if you're creating experiences on the tethered experience side, which is Oculus as an example, but the larger pie might be on the mobile VR side. Longer term, my opinion is mobile VR will be the winner in terms of the audience and engagement, mainly because it's easy to get it set up, and we'll likely see applications and content that are geared towards mobile VR experiences. Number 3, positioning. Very important to understand where you're playing in the sector. That VR stack that I shared a few slides ago, the reason we built that is to help us understand how the ecosystem is structured and where different companies that we look at from an investment perspective are playing. And that's important to understand not only as a business owner or a future business, but also from capital raising perspective, how are you going to differentiate, and how are you going to be successful in the long term. Verticals and use cases. I encourage folks, if they are just getting into the ecosystem, to think beyond entertainment. That slide on future use cases is evidence why people have started to explore opportunities beyond just gaming and beyond film or cinematic VR, mainly because we may see longer term that there may be much larger opportunity in B2B or business-to-business type applications where you're working with small businesses or large businesses, helping them create an application or a specific experience around what their core businesses are. And lastly, financing. So my view is that platforms such as Samsung and Oculus will continue to fund content in the near term. And that's pretty exciting in VR. And it's very different from digital media, because if you think about digital media years ago, you needed eyeballs to actually get funding, as an example. In VR, the content, the platforms themselves need good quality content, and they've dedicated large budgets to seed this ecosystem. So over the next couple of years, there is a thesis to build companies on content and application layer, mainly because it's in the best interest of platforms to actually seed and fund these companies. On the venture capital side, as I mentioned, there will be a few things that are going to be important. The uniqueness of the use case or the application you're working on, your talent around it, and definitely the potential business model around it. It doesn't need to be a perfect business model because the ecosystem is evolving over time, but understanding how your business is going to make money over time and be successful will be something that would need to be crystallized and clarified in the coming years. So those are my 5 key takeaways. I appreciate your time today. Thanks for having me. I'm pretty excited about this sector, and look forward to building this ecosystem with everyone here and across Canada. Thank you.
Our goal with this next panel is to really look at what these guys are doing. These are all companies and organizations based here in British Columbia, in Vancouver. So I want to hear about what each of them is doing in their organizations, and then kind of relate it back to some of the things that Prashant was just speaking of. So what we're trying to do, especially with organizations like BCIC and CreativeBC and DigiBC, is really look at what role can we play in helping to foster and build this ecosystem so that we really are positioned here in British Columbia to really be leaders in this sector, not just in Canada, but globally, and how do we partner within Canada as well. So I'm going to start with Anne-Marie and just ask you to kind of give us an overview. Anne-Marie's from Archiact and from CVR, the Consumer VR Show,
yes.
right? I keep saying it, I keep wanting to say the Canadian VR Show. But tell us a little bit about what's happening at Archiact in relation to VR and possibly AR as well, and then a little bit about the CVR Show.
Sure. So Archiact is one of the oldest virtual reality studios. We've been around since 2013, which makes us old in this industry. We have about 70 employees in Vancouver, just up the street here, and about 20 employees over in Shanghai. So we work on all platforms. We do content development. We also do a lot of B2B solutions now. One of our main focus is publishing. So we take content from other people and put it out onto different headsets and help people to do that. And working with companies like BCLC and Telescience World to create solutions for them as well. We also have a robotics department and an AR department. So we've got our fingers in everything. We also are the producers of CVR, which is Canada's largest VR, AR, and MR expo that will take place here in May with a ton of great Canadian talent and support like CreativeBC and other people that have jumped on board to really showcase what BC has to offer in this space.
So really, you guys are looking at, when Prashant was speaking to the stack, like really looking at that different aspects of being kind of fully integrated from the software
we've got such a talented team that we work with. So we have everything from engineers to artists to business development. So we really cross the whole, we kind of fall into all of the stacks that he presented and have all of those verticals covered in our company. So
cool. Okay, we'll come back to that in a sec.
Sure.
And next is Vincent McCurley, who's the creative technologist with the National Film Board. So at the NFB, for those of you who don't know, the NFB's digital lab, correct me if I'm wrong, is actually based out of here in Vancouver. And you guys have been doing a lot of interesting things, have a few very VR-focused projects that have been out there. You've won awards, been nominated for awards. From the, I guess, the pure entertainment, I know there's a lot of film, TV type of folks here as well, but tell us about what you're doing at the NFB and really the application in terms of, as consumers, how are we going to experience film and television?
Cool, yeah. So the National Film Board of Canada is publicly funded by the Canadian government with a mandate to tell socially relevant stories that reflect Canada to ourselves and Canadian points of view to the rest of the world. Now, I know as soon as you hear government, you think, oh, bureaucracy, and yes, there is some of that. But the NFB has been known to be a bit of a, I guess, an innovator in its time in terms of both storytelling, form, and technology. And we really like to play in that space. In the digital studio here in Vancouver and the French digital studio in Montreal, we've been really exploring that intersection of technology and storytelling and form. So this has really helped transition the organization to a digitally minded organization. We've been really experimenting with the different storytelling form and media as it's been evolving. So we still do a lot of traditional documentaries, ultra animations, but more recently interactive documentaries, mobile apps, installations, and most recently virtual reality and augmented reality. And we feel that the work that we do benefits the fields in which we work. And it can be really leveraged by the private companies that partner with us. So for example, we released a interactive documentary about 2 weeks ago called Bear 71 VR. And we teamed up with Jam3 in Toronto and Google to create this interactive documentary in conjunction with the launch of the WebVR version of Google Chrome. And another project that we worked on was Cardboard Crash, which looked at the intersection of ethics and self-driving cars and artificial intelligence. And it's a project where it was built in Unreal Engine and Unity, but we worked with the Mozilla Foundation here in town in order to find a way to export that to WebVR in the open web. So we also do a lot of work with educational institutions like Emily Carr and UBC and SFU in order to try to develop the technology as well as the talent, which is required to build this content. So yeah, that's something that we feel Canada has had a head start on in terms of VR, building content for VR. But in order to kind of hold on to that head start, we really need to develop the talent and retain that talent in Canada.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we hear throughout the day is the importance of talent development and the commitment from the province on helping us all figure that out. And I think you'll hear through the different panelists today that that is one of the critical points. So Michael Hefferon is the President and Chief Creative Officer at Rainmaker, so also a locally built company. So I want you to tell us a little bit about Rainmaker, but also where you're kind of taking live action and interactive and converging it together, and what your latest project is and how much you can tell us about that.
Sure, Prem. Thanks. Yeah. I guess I come at it from, or our company comes at it from more the IP perspective that was discussed. And what we're looking to do is create experiences and engagement factors. The predominant audience group for the type of shows we do are anywhere from 3 to 13 is kind of our core group. And one of the new projects that we're looking at that I'll discuss and how we're integrating VR into it is a 6 to 60 age range. And that really is the reboot of the 1994 animated series, which under the name Reboot, was the first ever CG animated show on television. So we're looking to do something different, and the approach and how we're looking to create the new Reboot going forward is really from a 360 standpoint of engagement. Kids are no longer engaged solely on linear. They're looking to put their time into things that they can have a participatory involvement in. And so how can we do that? How can we extend an interactive component to the storytelling that we're doing? So that's kind of our approach on, the next generation of Reboot. What would Reboot be today? And we have created a live action CG hybrid. We've empowering kids now to be able to go into the internet. And with everything that you're hearing, reading, seeing, our next battlefront really is in cyberspace. And so we're kind of taking the new heroes and guardians of cyberspace are going to be 4 16-year-old kids who will defend us all from all the bad guys that are out there. But what we're doing, we're merging the live action, and we're using live action because it's a broader range hook for audiences. So we want to be in a co-view space. Live action will trend higher than a typical animated audience age of 8. And it'll take us up to that 60 because we have strong drama, great story arcs across our entire series and character arcs. Our kids get to go into cyberspace. So what does that look like? Everyone's seen, hopefully, Iron Man. So we have that Tony Stark experience where we'll see kids in their HUDs, all the cool stuff going on. We'll see their POVs in cyberspace, and then we're in cyberspace. And the interesting thing, I think, for us is not just in this project with Reboot, but a focus for us is how do we create 360 content? And ultimately, it's merging the game industry into linear storytelling. So what we're doing is we're producing the new Reboot, the Guardian Code, with Unreal Game Engine. So we're taking all the power that game engine and game interactivity can do, and we're harnessing that to create the next experience level of things that we couldn't do in typical linear CG production. The other thing it lets us do, and when you're in the kid space, budgets and challenges of financing your shows are key. Creating engagement experiences are key. Marketing your content so kids will want to watch it is key. And so for us, by taking those same assets that we're creating from the linear television show, because we're not only just building assets that could be used for games, we're actually building out the worlds. So these are full worlds that can be interactive, played with. And from that, our focus really is on the mobile VR experience, because we think that's one for our audience age range, from the immediacy, from an entry-level cost standpoint. Most kids nowadays do have a smartphone or a form of a tablet that they have access to, and so the ability to create these little mobile VR experiences. So for example, our 4 cyber guardians are defending cyberspace and battling cyber locusts that are sent by our bad guy. All of a sudden, our kid at home has watched that episode on YTV here in Canada with our great partners at Chorus, and they can then take their smartphone and watch that clip and be in the middle of that action with our 4 guardians battling cyber locusts and see all this thing happening around us. So we're creating these short form content clips, using assets from the show, purposing them from the VR experience that we're creating. Kids can also, from all our really cool cyber locations in cyberspace, can do virtual tours and feel like they're there, be there. They can be in our Guardian's ship, the Kodak, and see all the cool things happening around them. So for us, it's creating an engagement standpoint. It's taking, from a brand perspective, ensuring that when kids aren't watching it linear-wise, they're still engaged with our franchise when it's not on air. Core for us, when you're looking at the funding aspects, is we're using linear ultimately to drive the awareness for the show. So for us, it's not having to go out and market the VR separately. We're using the marketing from the show itself to market the VR, to create a further experience, which for us, back to broadcasters, means that kids will want to tune into the show so they can actually watch that clip after the show's over.
Right. So you're really you're really embracing that entertainment piece
Right.
of what Prashant's slides were indicating, that that's where a lot of work is happening now, clearly, especially some of the, obviously the stuff at the NFB and the stuff that you're doing, Michael. But we're going to see a lot of shifts in that. And this morning, we saw the demo from Microsoft showing the video from Goldcorp and how they're using AR as well. So it's pretty exciting, and how all aspects of our lives that this stuff may touch, from entertainment experiences. But before we start to dive a little further into what you're doing in your organizations, I'm just curious if there's anything specifically that kind of either, I guess, confirmed for you through some of the stuff that the Prashant study is revealing, or something that was new information to you, or something that sort of made you think, oh, that could be kind of an interesting direction for us to go in. You start, Anne-Marie, especially with the CVR show coming up.
Sure. Well, it was great to see how many companies are actually working fully into the VR space now. I was surprised by the numbers and, excuse me, sorry, and the, that's okay, and the amount of people that are focusing on VR in the different aspects. It's great to see BC's got such a dynamic ecosystem of VR companies that are doing really fascinating, interesting things. So if you go down to Future Realities, you see people like Lamazoo who are doing, vet and education, and LNG who's doing real estate, and Conquer Mobile who's doing medical. It's really interesting to see all the enterprise solutions that are coming out of it. And I know with CVR, our speakers and the people that are coming, I was expecting so much more from gaming and background, but we've got a ton from film and a ton from marketing and media, and great enterprise solutions that are coming. And it's great because there are so many BC companies that are jumping on board onto the event, and just partners that we have at Archiact that we're working with. So it's really exciting to see how it's growing, and I think that BC is going to jump ahead of a lot of places just because of our VFX background and film background, more so probably than the rest of the country, although they might get mad that I said that.
Yeah. So Vincent,
Sorry.
the National Film Board is a national organization. You work with companies and producers and creators across the country. Again, kind of going back to the study and some of the early results from it, but also, in reference to kind of what Anne-Marie's referencing is, I know that NFB, I've talked to Lock Dow there as well, that you're really working with people all over the country.
Yeah, definitely. There's VR talent all across the country for sure, just because the gaming and the VFX and just kind of startup and software culture is really prevalent across kind of the major hubs. So I guess we do work with storytellers across the country, but it has been tough to find kind of the VR creators where the storytellers are as well, because we try to cover north, south, east, west, everywhere. But from Prashant's slides, one of the things that really kind of struck me was that kind of time frame of when people think VR was really going to kind of become mainstream, I think it was. And we're constantly trying to gauge our audiences to determine if there's kind of enough mainstream penetration to justify creating a project for a particular audience. And so that number of 2 to 5 years was very interesting to us, because we know a lot of storytellers are coming to us now saying, we want to do a VR piece now, but the second half of that equation is who's going to be able to see it, right? Now, with some of the production timelines at the film board, some of those projects take 2 to 5 years. So it's kind of heartening to see that by the time some of these projects that start today are done, there'll be a large audience for them. But yeah, I think probably going to have to go through this trough of disillusionment, which is kind of a key word in VR. But coming out the other side is looking really exciting for sure.
So Michael, from your perspective, you're doing kind of all of it in this one show in some sense. Where, I guess that can kind of drive to the talent question as well, but from what you've heard in the presentation earlier, but also how are you finding the people to make a show like Reboot?
I think the studio's been around for 27 years, and I think we've been originally known as Mainframe, and so Mainframe is our TV division, so actually producing the new Reboot or Reboot is our Mainframe side of it. It's really having great IP to work on, people get really excited about, and it's really going out there and recruiting and finding people you don't even realize who have maybe a passion and a side interest in VR that all of a sudden, they get an application to do it. But we go out, we recruit from other companies, and we look to build a workforce that way. It's kind of what we did. We weren't a game company per se, but I think out of our 300 and some people in the studio, probably 40, 50 of them are from the game side now, as we've really tried to converge how we do our storytelling. And VR right now represents probably a handful of the group. We see that expanding, but we really see it in respects of we're not looking to create independent VR experiences without a core driver, which for us is IP, whether it's our property that we're taking forward like Reboot, or us being able to go to some other partners and being able to pitch how we can take their property and create a 360 experience out of it. So the original Reboot sold for 84 countries. It was, I think, 4 or 5 seasons in its run. But interesting, what it did for Mainframe as a company is it created a whole new business. And that was being the first CG studio to do long form like that. We worked with every major toy company, every major IP property. We see that same type of thing happening now in doing game engine production and being very innovative in 360 content. And we may work with outside partners on some of the VR experiences. And so we'll look to partners within Vancouver. We're working with a game company here in Vancouver right now for some of our mobile game experiences for Reboot. So we were looking really at partnerships, some that we'll recruit for, and others that we'll partner with some of the great companies that are local or across Canada.
Interesting. Vincent, what you said about storytelling and kind of finding the storytellers in this medium, I'm curious, so we've heard content is going to rise to the top. Content is going to be what drives these technologies across, whether it's entertainment purposes or otherwise. But what is it, and the NFB is, has a long history of great storytelling and empowering storytellers. What is different for a storyteller when they're approaching doing something in pure VR rather than traditional linear storytelling?
Right, so I think a lot of the people we've worked with so far are filmmakers making the transition into VR. So the language of cinematic storytelling has evolved over the last many decades, and the composition of the frame is such a critical part of storytelling. So that's probably the major adjustment that they're having to make. The fact that there's no frame to kind of reduce that cognitive load of what to look at, right? So you're having to deal with kind of the audience psychology of, oh my gosh, where am I? The other part is just the interactive nature of VR. So linear storytelling, there's, I guess, a long history of kind of what works. We have like narrative arcs that kind of build to a climax and tell a story that way. But interactive storytelling has only really been around through like gaming over the last few decades. So that's really been an interesting challenge of how do you tell a story when the audience has that agency, and how do you craft that emotional arc while giving them the freedom to do what they want within the space. So that's definitely been a challenge, and I think we're kind of chipping away at it, but when we have creators that have kind of grown up natively in VR and gaming and really understand it, as opposed to kind of moving from an existing media, trying to translate that into new media, I think when we have those native, I guess, VR storytellers, the kids that are growing up today, that's when we're really going to get some serious breakthroughs in VR storytelling.
Yeah. And that sort of leads to the part of CVR, there is a career expo that's part of it as well. Is there? No?
Well, the VEC is doing
Right,
career.
but it sort of happens
It happens on
around the
same
same
day.
time.
Yes.
So that sort of, which is kind of interesting as well, because that sort of leads to that talent thing of, these storytellers. Tomorrow there's 1,500 students coming here who are high school grade 11 and 12 students. Mm-hmm. They'll be looking at all of this stuff. So, we want them to go and learn to be, storytellers, filmmakers, product developers. When you're talking to other companies as well, and sort of even outside the entertainment space, is that the biggest challenge? Is ensuring that there is the enough people here to develop this stuff further and have those skills?
I think we're lucky because we have a lot of great schools here that are training people in VR and adapting to it. I mean, we've got great coding schools and the background of that, but we also have amazing institutions like Emily Carr, and SFU. I know that we've got amazing co-op students in every department, from art to engineering to robotics, that work in our company that come out of the schools. And it's interesting because there's, people working in robotics who also do gaming, who also do this. So I think it's a whole new culture of people that are coming out and that are interested in it, and a lot of people that are self-taught and designing and doing that. So I think that it will be really interesting to see, we have people at CVR that are speaking that were neurosurgeons and now have a VR company.
Really?
Which is, so it's exciting to see those types of things that are happening, and people that are trained in one thing but developing for another. So it's going to be really interesting to watch what happens in that space as well. So,
And you said you work with the schools a lot as well.
Yeah, I was gave a talk at the Digital Media Youth Expo just in North Vancouver a couple of weeks ago. And we were talking about different forms of storytelling and how it's not just always linear. And it was amazing to see the kids just kind of picking up understanding it, and with the goal of hopefully inspiring them to then, once they graduate high school, move into a program like SFU Interactive or VFS, and then eventually a career in VR, AR, or whatever the future is. And then hopefully work at the NFB.
Yeah, they'll be on this panel in 5 years. Michael, what excites you most about you obviously Rainmaker's really embraced everything that you can possibly do, it sounds like, especially in this next version of Reboot. But what excites you about what's next?
It really comes down to experience. So for us, as you have a window, or you have an audience that's out there, and really how do you capture them and how do you deliver them great content? It still comes down to content, it still comes down to great storytelling, it still comes down to characters that you want to get excited about, but how do we merge that in a really cool way that people have never seen or ever experienced before. So I think we're one of the first big scale television series being done in a game engine to the production value and level that we're doing. Rendering out in 4K, that might not seem like a lot to people, but the fact that nobody renders out animation in 4K, but we can do that, and we can render frames in seconds as opposed to 3 to 10 hours a frame is huge. And what does that really mean is that we can create more and more levels of engagement. We can create alternative endings or ways that our audience is going to be able to participate interactively in storytelling because the tool sets are out there. So I think you're seeing at a very early stage of a shift in how entertainment is going to happen, where that focus is. I think VR is going to be a driving focus for that, as kids want to be a part of that. It's the empowerment factor. And they want to be with their friends doing something that's cool, and so the fact that they could be heroes doing something, those are the kind of things that we're looking to do. So for us, when you're talking about how do you find storytelling with VR, to me VR, game engine, all these things are tool sets that we give creative people the opportunity to work with. So with Reboot, from an interactive standpoint, we had game people involved through our script process in the very beginning, very early on into our development phase. We created our digital trading card game was that way. How do powers work? How do you power up things? So we very much looked at it from an interactive standpoint of how kids are playing in games, because for us, your audience factor after 8, most kids, and especially most boys, will shift to game content. How do we get them to stay on a linear thing? So kind of deliver that game experience within a linear television show. So that excites me.
Yeah.
The fact that I think from a storyteller, from a producer, and from an experience level, I think all the great things that BC has with its talent base in games, VR, VFX, in animation, in live action, I see really a convergence of those all coming together and not being independent any longer, but really finding synergies of how they work together to create great content and great stories that engage our audiences.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an exciting time. We have a few minutes if there's any questions. I don't know if there's any microphones, but any questions? Rick Griffiths, yes. Yeah.
A couple of thoughts. One thought just to share with you guys. About 20 years ago, the first incarnation of DigiBC was created called New Media BC. And 3 of the founding members was a guy called Bob Scarabelli that founded Rainmaker, a guy called Chris Brough that founded Mainframe, and somebody whose name I can't remember from Electronic Arts. Oh, Tiny Williams Sr., originally an investor in distinctive software that became Electronic Arts. And the reason that New Media BC was created was because those 3 founding forefathers of the digital media industry could see that one day those 3 industries would come together and blend those skill sets to create a whole new industry. So we're here today, I guess, to celebrate that fact. And I think my perspective, coming from a business and finance career through that whole era, was that neither of those industries in BC really created homegrown global companies that were able to stay independent and grow themselves as Canadian companies. Most ended up, if you like, selling out to American companies. And they were never able to convince the venture capital community or the finance community of how their business models would sustain and grow and scale. And I think the challenge to these industries that are intersecting is to do that. And to, the first presenter has sort of thrown down the gauntlet that there is a unique opportunity for a new business model that will finally engage the finance community and the venture capital community. And so I think collaborating around how to create fantastic companies that are homegrown and scale and grow here is the one that is really the next challenge.
Yeah, definitely. Well said. So we have a couple of minutes, maybe some final thoughts and comments on maybe what Rick's comments and.
I mean, I agree.
Yeah.
BC is tremendously innovative, and the people that started our industry. If you look at something like Mainframe, a lot of the other CG studios or people that have gone to start them have come from that. I think you've seen a real shift coming from Toronto originally. All IP creation, really, for a good point, had come out of Toronto. You've seen that real shift in the fact that original IP is being generated here. You're creating experiences. You have, I think, a very collaborative ecosystem in BC within the individual sectors themselves, us on the animation side, working very closely with our, in some cases, competitors to really build an industry and build value to BC. We see that in all the trade shows that we go to and the different events that, yes, we're all out there vying for clients and vying for opportunities, but we think that if we can bring those opportunities to BC and get a client to come here at least for that project, they'll stay, and maybe they'll work with someone else. So we really kind of create that kind of environment, and I've never seen that in all the other cities I think I've worked in and lived around the world to see such a great collaborative effort. And there's great talent here, great companies here, and as you said, and my belief is I see really a convergence of these groups coming together to create a new industry and new opportunities for everybody.
Any final thoughts from you, Vince?
Cool. Well, the NFB has had a history of kind of developing and incubating technologies that have kind of spun off and become bigger companies, like IMAX was first kind of started in the NFB, and then I think Daniel Langlois' Softimage came out of there, and a lot of software and animation tools. So it's something where it's kind of this government incubator that's where you can take risks and develop potential technology that you can then go and create a thriving business out of. So I'm hoping that we can be a part of that for VR.
Yeah, definitely. Last word to Anne-Marie.
Sure. No, and just to summarize all of that, I think that we do really need to work together. I think right now there is a bit of separation as people are kind of trying to find their way in this system, because there's VR and AR and there's different companies. But I know from an Archiact point of view, whenever we've had investors come, everyone in the city jumps behind to help us to sell Vancouver as a city. So we'll have a roundtable at the Vancouver Economic Commission with yourself and the NFB, and people like Launch Academy and local VCs that are coming on board. And it is collaborative, so it'd be great to see that move forward and have a tighter knit community that helps us sell both Vancouver and BC as a destination for it. Because I think we have all of the skills and the tools here to make that happen. It's just so new.
And we have a whole tech summit to
Yes.
discuss that.
Talk.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
There's several more panelists and speakers to come. I think what you're going to find is the spirit of collaboration is going to come through in a lot of these other speakers that you're going to see today and hear their presentations. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And we're not breaking yet. We have another James. I'm going to hand it over to James. So thanks very much. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.